Another week has passed and it's time for another MapPorn review. Almost forgot to record this one, but I remembered at the last second just in time. So here we go. Welcome to MapPorn review video number 5. So here we go. We're going to look at the top posts of this week on r/MapPorn. This one is kind of interesting. Let's see. If the world if sea level decreased by 1,000 meters. It's kind of blurry. I wonder if there's a better resolution version available. Yes. Okay, looks like there's a pretty high-res version available. And this is really interesting right off the bat. It's just a cool concept. And I have some idea of how I might do something like this. I guess what you could do is download a elevation model, a bathymetry model of the ocean. I'm pretty sure those are available from, if not Natural Earth, you could probably find it. Just some research paper or some university website or maybe NOAA, one of those organizations. You just take that bathymetry and in QGIS, there's some sort of function. You can threshold that depth raster at minus 1,000 meters, draw an outline and convert it to a vector, and then merge that vector with a shapefile of countries. Or maybe exclusive economic zones. Maybe that would make it a little easier because those already extend outward into the sea. So that's how you would make something like this. Well, let's see what the results are. So the Mediterranean is actually quite deep. So the Mediterranean is still there, even though it's sealed off, I guess. The Strait of Gibraltar basically is completely closed. The Bosphorus is closed. So in reality, what would happen is the Mediterranean would actually start to dry up. So you'd end up with a huge basin below sea level. And I believe that was actually the case a few thousand years ago. I might be misremembering, but I'll check on that. And the reason the Mediterranean is as deep as it is because it is actually the remains of an ocean floor, and Africa and Europe, those continental plates, are currently colliding. That's why the Alps mountains are so tall, because they're basically a brand new mountain range that's still growing as we speak. So Africa is still in the process of colliding with Europe, but this old ocean, which had a very deep floor, is still there. So even if the sea level dropped by a whole kilometer, the Mediterranean would still be there. As would the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea also. Those are both quite deep, actually, and the reason is the same as the Mediterranean. These are actually the remains of an old ocean. So the North Sea and the Baltic, meanwhile, are completely gone, it looks like. Norway gained quite a lot of territory. Svalbard is now basically connected to the Norwegian mainland. Russia gained some land, it seems like. I think that this 1,000 meter level is pretty much the continental shelf, is what it gives. The US has expanded, Mexico, but for the most part, the Gulf of Mexico is still there. And the West Coast is actually not all that different. The Channel Islands are now connected to California, but the West Coast is very deep. The continental shelf is not really present there, or at least it doesn't extend as far out as on the East Coast, so the difference is not that huge. It looks like lakes, I guess, are unaffected, so we're just keeping lakes the same. Hudson Bay is gone. The Northwest Passage, all these waterways are completely gone. So that's a pretty big change. Alaska and Russia are now connected by the Bering Land Bridge. And as you may know, this actually was historical several, I believe, 14-ish thousand years ago when sea levels were a bit lower. There was actually a land connection, and that's supposedly, or when I was in school, we were taught that that's how humans actually crossed over into the Americas. But in the last 5 or 6 years, discoveries have been made about how it's possible that Polynesian settlers crossed the Pacific on boats, because they actually found human remains in I think it's in Chile, as old as 16 or 17,000 years, which is several thousand years older than the hypothesized crossing. So if they crossed all the way up here, how did they get all the way down here so quickly? There was actually a group that I think did a proof of concept where they made their own primitive boat and sailed across the Pacific just to demonstrate that this was possible with primitive technology. So Argentina is expanded, Falkland, UK. It looks like the Falkland Islands conflict is a lot more relevant all of a sudden because the Falklands are no longer a tiny island group that nobody cares about. So that's a pretty big change. Brazil looks pretty much the same. The Caribbean's not extremely different. The only difference that I really see is the Bahamas, where those shallow waters are now land. Honduras and Nicaragua are kind of expanded here off to the side, but everything else is relatively minor differences. Africa is actually not too different. South Africa grew a little bit to the south, but other than that, the coastline is pretty similar. It looks like the Red Sea is almost gone. Certainly the strait around Djibouti is just closed, so that's interesting. Mauritius has expanded, the Seychelles. Basically, all of these little island countries in the Indian Ocean are a lot larger now. And interestingly, French Polynesia and the Heard and McDonald Islands belonging to Australia also seem to have suddenly grown quite a bit, exposed a lot of continental shelf. But the biggest winner, I think, well, in relative terms certainly, is New Zealand. Let's see if so it's kind of split between the two different sides of this map here. But New Zealand, it's a little known fact that most of the continental crust of New Zealand is actually underwater, as much as 80 or 90%. So if you lower the sea level by about 1,000 to about 1,500 meters, you would expose a lot of this continental shelf. So here in this map, you see that 1,000 meters exposed quite a bit already. All of this stuff off of the coast of the South Island. North and south are connected, obviously, but there's these arms of land protruding outward. But if you lowered it even more, maybe another 500 meters or so, you would pretty much get a contiguous landmass stretching all the way from these Antarctic islands down here through South and North Island and connecting all the way to Norfolk Island and New Caledonia. One big sort of squiggling landmass. So that's the interesting thing about New Zealand. And I had a project a couple years ago that was a little too complicated, a little too much work, so it didn't really go anywhere. But my idea was to create some kind of computer program or statistical model that would model the climate of, it's called Zealandia. The continent of New Zealand is called Zealandia. And I wanted to model the climate of Zealandia if it rose from the depths, basically. So the rest of the world stays exactly the same, but Zealandia rises by 1,500 meters, and just to see what sort of climate would happen there, because I could create a whole separate video about that, but basically the current here south of Australia would be hitting and depositing a lot of rainfall and cold water. The areas in the east here, there would be a rain shadow. There's a warm current coming down from, I'm forgetting this stuff now, but down basically from the equator. So all these interactions between the landform and the currents and the winds would create really interesting climates. And that's a project that I did a few years back in college, but sort of put it on hold because I just didn't have time to do it. But this map reminds me of the fact that New Zealand as a continent is actually mostly underwater, and it does have its own plate, or maybe even two plates, right? Because there's kind of a slip fault or whatever it's called, and there's a lot of earthquakes that happen in New Zealand. So Indonesia got a lot of land here. Japan is pretty huge. I kind of wonder how they interpolated these boundaries. I'm guessing it's probably just closest to the nearest landmass or former landmass, I suppose. So Japan grew quite a bit. That seems to be about it. Antarctica, I guess, is bigger, but you don't really notice the difference because most of the shallow areas were covered by ice pack already, so it doesn't look all that different on a map. And French Polynesia, I suppose, or sorry, French Antarctic territories. I hope I didn't say French Polynesia the first time. If I did, I meant French Southern and Antarctic territories. The topography of Ukraine. This is a nice map. It's one of those, so we've seen this in previous videos. You go into Blender, you put in a depth map, and you put in some kind of texture. I guess this person didn't even add a texture, they just colored it based on the depth map and added some shadows. Boom, and then you just render it, and there you go. You have a nice 3D map of whatever you want. So this person rendered Ukraine. Miguel Valenzuela is the artist, I suppose. And yeah, it's cool. You know, you can see all the features of Ukraine. Once again, it's exaggerated. So, and Ukraine is not a very mountainous country. Even the Carpathian Mountains here in the West are, I believe the highest peak is around 9,000 feet or something, which is pretty high, relatively speaking, but these mountains for the most part are pretty worn down and eroded. So it's not exactly like, you know, it's not like the Alps or Switzerland or anything. Crimea has some hills or some mountains, you can call them, but again, I think the highest point is 4,000 or 5,000 feet, I'm not sure. So overall, Ukraine is generally pretty flat and pretty well suited for agriculture. So that's this map. Okay, this one I've seen before. Let's see, percent of people who think their culture is superior to others. So they must have run some sort of poll just to determine what people thought, and I've seen this map at least 3 or 4 years ago, but possibly more. So the poll can't be any more recent than that. So it must have been 2017 or earlier, and the results are, I guess, pretty clear. Basically, the farther west / northwest you go in Europe, the less you have, the less belief you have in the superiority of your culture. I wonder what the covariate actually is, because the very farthest west countries of Norway, UK, Ireland, and Portugal have slightly higher rates of perceived cultural superiority. Now, it's also, I think, okay, so when I first saw this map several years ago, I looked into how exactly the question was worded, because one of the difficulties of asking everybody in Europe the same question is that you have to ask them in 30 different languages. And inevitably, there's going to be subtle differences in translation, subtle differences in semantics, and you're not going to get the exact same question asked to everybody. So it's quite possible that in Greek, for example, the question might sound different versus in English or French. So it is interesting that there's a pretty big difference between Norway and Sweden, given how relatively similar Norwegian and Swedish are as languages. I guess the same could be said with Ukraine and Russia, although Ukraine, I don't know if they would ask it in Ukrainian or Russian or maybe both, because a good percentage of the population doesn't know Ukrainian that well, or Belarusian, for example, in Belarus. So I don't know. There's a lot of methodological questions here, but I guess if we put that aside, so the winner is Greece, right? 89% of Greeks think their culture is superior. Georgia, it looks like it's pretty high here, and so is Armenia, 85 and 84%. Russia's pretty high at 69%. And Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, those are in the high 60s. So that's interesting. There's definitely a regional trend here that we can't ignore. And it doesn't seem to be based on linguistics, which is what I was sort of hypothesizing. Just looking at, you know, countries that have similar languages, countries that have different languages, like Romanian versus Serbian, for example. Very different languages, but very similar results, and the trend still holds regionally. So I'm not sure what this really means. I mean, I've seen a similar map somewhere of they asked people, are you willing to fight in a war? I forget if it's, are you willing to fight for your country or are you willing to die for your country? And the lowest level of, if you call that patriotism, the lowest level of patriotism was in Germany, where I believe 20 like 20 or 30% of people said they would be willing to fight in a war for their country. And that makes sense, right? For Germany, because of the historical reasons for why German nationalism and patriotism is sort of repressed, at least since World War II, right? And in that map, there were pretty high values. I remember for Poland, I think like Russia had a pretty high value. I would guess maybe Serbia. So I think the values were pretty similar, actually, to these values. Spain is very surprising. I wonder, though, there's kind of two different answers here. So if someone asks you, do you believe your culture is superior? You can say yes. And that only means one thing, right? That means I believe that my country's culture is the best. But if you say no, that could mean two different things. It could mean that either you believe that no culture is superior, or you believe that someone else's culture is superior, which is kind of interesting. So I wonder what the distinction would be there. Oh, and I saw this map earlier this week, I think on Twitter. Some people were surprised at how low France's number is. And French people definitely are very proud of their culture. But in my personal experience with France and French people, as proud as they are of their culture, they have a lot of respect for other cultures, such as British culture, German culture, Italian culture, Russian culture, American culture. Well, I don't know how much respect they have for American culture, but in any case, they believe that their culture is incredible and amazing and rich, and they're very proud of it, but I wouldn't say that they believe it's superior or the best. So maybe that explains the low percentage for France. So again, it comes down to just semantics and what do we mean by superior, but what exactly explains these results, I'm not sure. It's definitely has something to do with sort of liberalism in a classical sense, as you know, sort of Enlightenment thinking, post-nationalism kind of thing, versus more traditional. I don't want to say, again, it's always hard to put labels on these things, but I would say traditional is a good word to describe countries that believe that their culture is superior. So a lot of different things going on here, but this is an interesting map. Even if it's recycled, I'll let it slide. Here, let's open the comments just to get a little bit more insight. I have a good feeling about this comment section. Let's see. Switzerland neutral as ever, 50%. Okay. Okay. See, there we go. The discrepancy between Norway and Sweden is interesting. Yeah, see, there's another thing that I completely forgot to mention, but it's very true. We Swedes feel we are superior to everyone, so much so that it would be in poor taste to tell everyone about it. So it's a pretty funny joke, but it explains that in some countries it's okay to say we are superior, but in other countries it's not okay to make this kind of claim. So even if someone does consider themselves to have superior culture or their country, they wouldn't say it or they wouldn't admit it in a survey. So there is definitely some sort of socially desirable response bias, or whatever that bias is called. That's definitely a factor here. If you've ever been to a national day in Norway or Sweden, you would have seen the difference. In Norway, people dress up in national clothes and waves flags like it's 1950. In Sweden, you would not even notice the national day. Norwegians are way more patriotic and take a lot more pride in their culture compared to Swedes who don't really care. I am from Norway. This is Norway. I am Norwegian. They love to point out how Norwegian they are. Okay, so this is just one Reddit user's anecdote, but if it's accurate, I think it kind of makes sense. Because for most of Norway's history, it was ruled either by Denmark or by Sweden. And Sweden was the most powerful Scandinavian country for a while, controlling Finland, controlling Norway for a time period, even parts of Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states. So Sweden was always the premier Scandinavian country, and maybe that explains why Swedish people don't feel the need to insist on their Swedishness. It's sort of self-evident. Whereas Norway, which did not have a strong national identity until about the 19th century, maybe even 1900, their national identity came a little bit later, and that's why today maybe they feel the need to assert themselves as Norwegian a little bit more. Now, this argument, if I apply it to Russia and Ukraine, you would think that Ukrainians would like to assert their national identity a bit more, being sort of a more recently created nation state, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Ukraine is 41%, Russia 69%, so that doesn't quite work there. So it's an interesting theory, and I don't know, this is something to think about a little bit more, and I'm sure there's papers, academic papers, books and stuff written on these type of subjects, so I don't know, I'd like to see what people think. Interesting map. Gun country, a map of the USA consisting of 150 toy guns. So first I want to say this is really cool, and second I want to say that I don't think this really belongs on this subreddit. Maybe it's related to the Kyle Rittenhouse case. I feel like Reddit always has a lot to say about whenever there's anything related to guns in the US in terms of current events, there's always a huge reaction on Reddit. So anyway, but it's in general, I do like these kinds of like optical illusion type of pieces. I think there's like a grand piano. One of them is a grand piano that looks like a person or something from the other side. So anyway, I like that kind of stuff. Countries that have or have had openly gay heads of government: Iceland, Ireland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Serbia. So the outlier here is obviously Serbia. And let's see, I'm sure the comments section will have quite a lot to say about that. Serbia was Ana Brnabić, who I've never heard of, but to be fair, I don't know that many Serbian leaders. And there's kind of a combination here of people saying congratulations, but also saying, oh, I didn't know so-and-so was gay, it doesn't matter, he's a shit politician anyway. Which I think is the correct response. I don't understand why people are proud of politicians being gay. Like, I thought being a politician was a bad thing. Why would you celebrate that? Anyway, maps that are just lists, yeah. So yeah, interesting. I didn't expect to see Serbia here, as did most people, I think. But aside from that, I don't think this map warrants much more attention. Where people still practice open defecation. So Africa, South Asia, parts of Southeast Asia. Malaysia has no data. Conveniently for them, I'm sure it would not be a very flattering number. To be fair, they are more developed, so God knows. Thailand has a fairly low number, so yeah, so it looks like in just a few of these these are Niger, Chad, South Sudan. Those are pretty much the poorest, least developed countries on Earth. And it's no surprise that people openly defecate there, because that's how humans did it for 1 million years. So they're still doing it. And India and Central Africa, Pakistan, those countries are pretty high. I suppose the surprise for me is that Bangladesh is in the lowest category. Bangladesh has, I think, a lower human development index than India. And it's similar, I would say, a similar situation to Pakistan. So it's a little surprising to me that they are in different categories. But it could be for any number of reasons, actually. I suppose I'll maybe check the comments here. There could be some government policy. I know a lot of countries have very specific government policies targeting this sort of thing. And let's see, North Korea. Yeah, Argentina has no data. North Korea does have data. Okay, so Argentina is at 1.7%. I wonder who those people are in Argentina. I've never been, but I mean, it's a modern country. It's not like those countries that are in red there. Yeah, Mongolia. I mean, that's there are people in Mongolia that are still nomadic, So it's if you're in the middle of nowhere where you can't go anywhere. You have to go out in the open. So let's see, 6 to 25% is a massive range. Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. Okay, there's some jokes here, as you would expect with a poop-based map. Yeah, this is a good point. The overall number is really quite low considering how many people there are. And again, I mean, half the world lives in China and India, and both of those countries have made enormous progress, if you can call it that, in the last 50 years on eliminating open defecation, open sewers, expanding plumbing and sanitation. So that right there takes care of 3 billion people, basically. So a lot has changed recently. We're not living in the world of 1990, of 2000 anymore, where back then you could pretty confidently say that half the world lived in pretty severe poverty in 1990. But at this point, as of 2020, 2021, it's really not possible to say that anymore. So that is this map. Yeah, I will. The scale definitely is very arbitrary and seems kind of strange, but whatever. It's not the worst that I've ever seen. I think it adequately gets the message across. So Australia and the Mediterranean. This is an old map. I've seen this one before, but it is good, I suppose, to see every now and then. It's pretty well done, and it does show the huge size of the Mediterranean Sea. I guess it depends on what you're used to seeing, right? Either it shows the huge size of Australia or it shows the huge size of the Mediterranean. To me personally, I'm used to hearing about how massive Australia is. Australia is approximately the same size as the continental United States, and most of it is empty, unlike the continental United States, or at least barren and not usable for any kind of agriculture or human settlement. So to see the Mediterranean superimposed and actually very nicely going from here, what does that say? Straits of, I guess they renamed everything. Oh man, I'm gonna have to click on this. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look. The Straits of Ningaloo, I bet that must be what that thing is called there. The Bay of Yannery and Karinji Islands, that would be the Balearic Islands. Great Desert Isle, Gibson Sea. Ayers Rock is located in Sicily. And Alice Springs is close to, what city? Toronto? I don't know, Bari? I'm not too good with Italian cities. Black Sea Gulf. Crimean Bank. So there seems to be they're kind of switching up the nomenclature here, but I don't really know what most of these words mean. Toowoomba, Coolati, Inamika. I guess that's the Australian version of like Mississippi and Alabama and those type of words. Just kind of Aboriginal words and stuff like that. So, okay, so this is cool. Not a lot to be said, I think, but just something to look at, and that's good. That's a good type of map to have as well. Biden's approval rating in each state on Inauguration Day versus today. Okay, so this is an album. There's 2 maps, and the first map I'm assuming is Inauguration Day. I wish there was actual numbers associated with this. I'm assuming this is just majority approve, majority disapprove. So Florida, I believe, voted for Trump in 2020, but it seems like a small majority on Inauguration Day approved of Biden. And if I'm not mistaken, if I look at the 538 polls every now and then, I think at inauguration Biden had about a 55-60% approval rating, maybe. So there were some people that voted for Trump, but then decided to just give Biden a chance because we hadn't really seen anything yet, which is fair, I think. So this is Inauguration Day, and this is today. Okay, so majorities in every state disapprove of Biden's presidency, except for California, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont. I laughed at Maryland because, well, I don't know, being born in Maryland and spending a lot of time in Maryland, you know, growing up in the DC area, it makes a lot of sense because the people that live in Maryland are either, you know, formerly disenfranchised minorities who vote strongly Democrat, so black and a lot of Salvadoran population, or it's, you know, government workers who until recently were not particularly strongly for or against any party, but in recent times, government employees strongly back the Democratic Party. I'm gonna have to put an asterisk on that and look it up, but that's my sense, that's my hunch. So anyway, it makes sense why Maryland is one of those states. California, of course, also makes sense. Hawaii routinely posts the strongest Democratic election results in presidential elections, aside from DC, of course, which, by the way, seems to be missing from this map. I don't see DC anywhere, so that's interesting. What's interesting to me is even Washington State, it looks like majority disapproves. And that's tough. That's tough. Actually, I think... Oh, no, I'm sorry. These are state counts. Okay, so it used to be 25-25 out of 50 states, and now it's 45 states disapprove, 5 states approve. This is a weird way of looking at it. I don't understand why they don't just give us the percentage. At least the percent. Tell us the percentage in each state. But that's how it is. Okay, at the risk of opening a cesspool, I'm going to check the comments section very briefly on this one just to see what they're saying. Vermont is that ride or die state. Yes, sir. He doesn't care much about approval since he won't run again. I don't know. Yeah, that's it's possible. There's definitely rumors that he's not going to run again. But then it's like, who are they going to put? Kamala Harris, who I think is even less popular than he is. So I don't know what's going to happen in 2024, but it's going to be interesting. What is the source? Okay, so... Okay, it looks like this person took 5 numbers from 538 and did sort of their own analysis. That's the source for this. I don't think people like Biden that much on election day. I think the mentality was vote for anyone except for Trump. Two-party system. I mean, these comments seem pretty good. I think for the most part, people in these specialized subreddits, they tend to downvote, you know, very obviously political stuff here. Doesn't this... Yeah, okay, this is a good point. Foreigner here, please correct me if I'm wrong. Doesn't this happen with every one of your presidents? Don't they all disappoint you more after they've been in office for a bit? That is true. If you look at, historically speaking, approval ratings, I think the only exception basically is George W. Bush, and that was 9/11. Gave him a massive boost temporarily, but it went down from there. And this isn't unique to the United States. Actually, this comment right here points out that in France also, they elect their president and then they start, you know, things don't magically get any better, and so people start to complain and the approval rating falls. So that does tend to happen. Yes, this person is correct. Okay, so enough of this map. So this is interesting. Countries where more than 50% of the population is vaccinated with 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, this raises a lot of questions because what if you took a single-dose vaccine, such as the Janssen vaccine or Johnson & Johnson? How come this map says specifically 2 doses? Or do they mean fully vaccinated? But as we know now with boosters, the term fully vaccinated doesn't really mean anything because it's, you know, it's for certain age groups at least, the definition of fully vaccinated already has changed. And so maybe that's why this map avoids the term fully vaccinated, but still raises the question of what if you took a single dose vaccine? Does that not count as... Putting that aside, it looks like the Americas and I guess Catholic Europe, Latin Europe, it's a very interesting divide here. Slovakia and Croatia are the only Catholic countries that are not in this red group. Every other one of these gray countries here is an Orthodox Christian country. So Greece, of course, being the exception here. Greece is the only Orthodox European country that is in the red group here. So that's an interesting divide. But okay, we might as well look into the comments here. China, the rich Arab countries. Although Jordan is missing, and that's it. I think all of the wealthier Arab countries are in that category. Malta made it on the map. Okay. North Korea. Countries with sufficient organized state capacity. No, I don't think so. I think Russia has pretty strong state capacity. I think Belarus has pretty strong state capacity. I would not put those two countries in the same category as, Colombia or South Africa, countries that are more decentralized and there's more opportunity for people to just be off the grid, sort of. In Russia and Taiwan, by the way, is also not. Taiwan is famous for its sort of efficient and effective government, and it is, of course, highly centralized as well. So I disagree with that comment. I don't think it has much to do with state capacity. I believe it has to do with trust. A lot of Russians are going to Serbia for Western vaccines. That's true probably for liberal Russians, like Westerner. If you go with the Westerner versus Slavophile dichotomy, I'm guessing the Westerners are going to do that to get their Pfizer or whatever shots. But regular Russian people have a big distrust for anything having to do with the government, basically, and that comes from the Soviet experience. So if the government suddenly is strongly encouraging you to take a shot that was hastily developed and so on, of course, people who have either first or second-hand experience of the failed sort of communist experiment, those people are not going to be extremely enthusiastic about taking this kind of shot. So the numbers for Russia make sense, and yes, it is a trust thing. The situation in Taiwan, from what I understand, is a little bit different. It seems like people in Taiwan do have a high degree of trust in their government and their system, but at the same time, they kind of had the issue of something to do with essentially a lack of supply of vaccines. So for a while, they were refusing foreign vaccines because they were trying to pursue their own domestic project. And then at one point they got the opportunity to get some imported Western vaccines, but they denied it. So I forget exactly the sequence of events, but in Taiwan it seems to be just kind of a bungled approach by the administration. And there's also the fact that because Taiwan is an island and it's relatively easy, there's not that many different points of entry, it's relatively easy for Taiwan to seal itself off. And that's pretty much what they did. And they were very effective relatively at containing the spread in the very beginning. So Taiwan was not extremely affected. They didn't have a whole lot of cases. And plus East Asian cultural norms, things like close body contact, shaking hands, and so on is not really encouraged. People tend to wear masks in public already, especially on public transit, especially if they know that they're sick or coughing. So for a lot of reasons, Taiwan didn't have a very strong COVID outbreak in the first place, and that also contributes to people not being extremely anxious to get the vaccine because to them it's not really a big problem in their lives. All right, so this is an interesting map, and it gives you some interesting data points about some of the more hidden aspects of different societies, I guess. Some of the harder to measure aspects. United Nations vote on condemning the human rights situation in Crimea. I don't know what human rights situation they're talking about, unless they're still talking about the occupation from 2014. I mean, obviously, Crimea is still occupied, quote unquote. For all intents and purposes, it's basically integrated into the Russian Federation administratively. And so I'm not sure. I'm reading the comments here because I'm trying to find out what this resolution is even talking about. But I think it's basically one of those things that, for example, pretty much every single year the UN passes a resolution criticizing the Israeli settlement in Palestine and their treatment of Palestinians. So maybe, ever since 2014, every single year there's a resolution introduced that criticizes the Russian actions in Crimea. So looking more closely here, pretty much have, two political blocs in the world, the blue bloc and everybody else. The blue bloc is, Ost Kansas, the Anglo countries, plus the European Union, plus former Soviet countries that are desperately seeking to integrate with the West. So that would be the Baltic countries, Georgia and Ukraine specifically. They're I'm generalizing here because I'm excluding large portions of their population that are very much against integrating with Western Europe, but there are, sizable, powerful groups of people in those countries that are very interested in distancing themselves from their Soviet experience and trying to seem more Western, more modern. And so basically, whatever the United States does in the United Nations, they vote for it. So, for example, actually, even the resolutions that I mentioned criticizing Israel, the only countries that would vote against those resolutions would be USA, Israel's biggest ally, Israel themselves, and weird random Eastern European countries such as Poland and Ukraine. And I wonder if it's related to the fact that many of Israel's prime ministers were actually born in Poland or Ukraine. But regardless, basically, those Eastern European countries, it seems, are so desperate to curry favor with the United States that they vote with the U.S. in one voting bloc, even more so than Western European countries, traditional U.S. allies. So those are the two blocks, basically. And actually, this map is about Crimea, but this map is pretty much how the United Nations votes all the time on everything. Now, yellow, of course, is abstained, but an abstention in this case is pretty much the same as voting no. I mean, when somebody stands up and says, hey, look at the human rights situation, and you sit there and say and refuse to comment, effectively you're saying no. But the reason that countries or delegates abstain rather than explicitly voting against a resolution is pretty much for plausible deniability, to be able to say, oh, well, we never voted against your resolution. So the against countries are Russia, Serbia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. This is like the Russian alliance. Syria, Iran, these countries are also kind of adjacent. India voted against, which is interesting. I know they have a lot of deals with Russia in terms of military equipment and intelligence sharing and things like that. So definitely the two countries have a very strong relationship, and it's been that way actually for several decades. So I think that makes sense. China voted against, and I'm not really sure why, to be honest. China and Russia have what I would describe as a pragmatic partnership. I don't think the two countries really are very ideologically aligned. The majority of people in Russia are somewhere between ambivalent to sort of scared of China. China certainly is, they see China as a rising power that is a unfathomably huge country in terms of the population. It's a common sort of meme to talk about China buying out Siberia or Chinese people settling Siberia. And it's true, if 10% of China moved to the Russian Far East, that's actually that's the same as the current population of Russia, right? That's 140 million people. So from a simplistic standpoint, this anxiety towards China is not totally unfounded. But that's sort of how most Russians view the Chinese nation. I don't know what the other side is. I don't know how Chinese view Russia. I know that in school in China, the communist agenda still, emphasizes the contributions of especially Vladimir Lenin. And so there's some, sort of friendly relationship there a little bit. And China owes a lot to Russia in terms of military equipment. They have lots of deals with energy, whether it's natural gas, coal, lumber, things like that. So the two countries do cooperate on a pragmatic level, but I'm not sure if they are natural allies. And in the past, their relationship has proven to be difficult. So it's interesting to see China being part of this bloc here. And I think that the main reason is that they're in opposition to the United States and to Western Europe. So there's a lot that could be analyzed here in terms of geopolitics, but the bottom line is that this split here you'll see on the vast majority of United Nations votes. Cannabis legalization in the US since 1996. It's an animation and it's progressing kind of fast. Okay, so medical, and I was like in, middle school, high school, college throughout all these years. So I would hear all the time how every single state, Michigan legalized it, Washington legalized it, whatever. So this stuff kind of happened in real time, like at least in my memory. And yeah, Colorado, Maine. I mean, I guess, people are realizing that marijuana, or cannabis is the more politically correct term. Cannabis is not a very harmful drug, and it's certainly no more harmful than alcohol. And honestly, I was surprised that Donald Trump didn't reschedule, marijuana off of Schedule 1. I feel like that would have been, if there was one crazy president to do that would have been him. Maybe it came up on the agenda, maybe for political reasons it was decided not to do it, but certainly whoever does that, whether it's an act of Congress, whether it's the president doing it, I don't remember the technicalities, but I believe it's, let's look it up. So it looks like the president cannot unilaterally legalize or reschedule marijuana, but it says the president might order executive agencies to consider altering the scheduling of marijuana or changing their enforcement approach. And I think Obama did this with, now I forget, but basically he did this with one of the illegal immigrant categories. You can pretty much tell the Justice Department or some agency to say, hey, let's, we want to enforce the law, and let's enforce the law, but let's put these cases at the very, very bottom of our list, which practically means, we're never actually going to prosecute people for this. So that's one possibility. It seems kind of strange that way. It seems like a hack of the government, but I don't know. I mean, you could say that judicial review was a hack too. There's nothing in the Constitution that ever talks about judicial review. It just says that it's the supreme law of the land, blah, blah, blah. And, who was it? Marbury, right? Made the famous case that the Supreme Court had this ability, but, so in a way, everything is a hack. But anyway, so that's one approach, is you can just, there you go, grant clemency to federal offenders. You can, there's a lot of things the president can do. But my question is, how would you actually legalize it federally? So the Controlled Substances Act is an act of Congress. And the act of Congress imposes a regulatory framework. So I'm guessing that the Congress passed a law that gives a certain procedure for how these substances are supposed to be added to Schedule 1. And so the way to do that is either by legislation, so Congress would have to pass it, or through an administrative rulemaking process overseen by the Drug Enforcement Administration. Now, it seems to me extremely unlikely that the Drug Enforcement Administration would ever choose to pretty much cut their funding massively. Although I don't know how much of their activity actually relates to marijuana, but I'm sure it's a non-trivial amount. Even if it's not 50% of their budget, even if it's 5% of their budget, no agency wants to suddenly have 5% of their budget be deemed irrelevant. especially the DEA, because the DEA is one of those agencies that basically can purchase, surplus military stuff, or not even surplus, they just military style equipment, which is a huge moneymaker for a lot of people. And so, yeah, for that reason, I don't think they would ever, if left to their own devices, I don't think the DEA would ever approve that. But Congress can do it. And honestly, I'm sure Congress would. It's just sort of not on the agenda, So I don't know what's going to happen, honestly. I mean, it's pretty clear at this point that the vast majority of the public has no problem with marijuana. They have no problem with making it legal. I think that, and the federal government has sort of bigger things to worry about. So this whole nullification by the states thing that's kind of going on right now is not really an issue, because even if the federals were to try to, I don't know, go to Colorado and enforce order or whatever, it would just be a tremendous waste of resources. So it's kind of this weird equilibrium. Yeah, I don't know. We'll just have to watch and see what happens. Okay, and this is going to be my last one. So, oldest business in every country around the world. Okay, I like this one. This is not a current events map. This is just something interesting that everybody would love to look at. And okay, this is wow, so it's just a giant list, but it looks like it's sorted. Okay, and it looks like the oldest business is Kongo Gumi, which is a mine in Japan dating back to 578. A lot of the world's oldest stuff is in Japan, because Japanese society is pretty much intact since God knows when, since maybe the 5th century. The Japanese emperor traces his lineage all the way back to the sun god. So, and they've been ruling, as far as we can tell, for 2,000 years, I want to say, in various capacities. Obviously, the emperor didn't always exercise direct control of the country, and certainly does not have that power now. But the fact that that office, that title, has existed continuously for so long is pretty mind-blowing to me. There's pretty much 2 countries, I think, that have sort of one history, and that's the real winners, of course, are the United Kingdom. The UK has never been conquered, occupied, or had any significant change in its social order, social structure in the last... Well, there was William the Conqueror, right, who came from Normandy, but he didn't... it wasn't like a total conquest. It was more like he just kind of took over the government. So there was Danelaw in the 900s. I mean, it's been 1,000 years, since anything really crazy happened in the UK. You compare that with Germany, which was bombed to shit in 1945. This whole Soviet countries, having their whole experiment and their revolutions and stuff, and France having their bloody revolution that eliminated the upper classes of society, and so on and so forth. I know England had a civil war. They had I don't know, but for the most part, the monarchy has stayed for a long time. So England and Japan. Every other monarchy is either some kind of fake, reestablishment, or has gone away, like China, like Russia, like Germany, like France, like Italy. So interesting. So it's no surprise that some of the oldest things are in these countries, although the UK looks like it's not that high up on the list of oldest businesses, or England, I guess. The different countries of the UK are counted separately. So England, the Trinity House, it's a shipping company from 1514. That's pretty old. Pivovar Broumov in the Czech Republic. It's pretty darn old. Ma Yu Ching's Bucket Chicken House. That sounds really good. I want to have some Ma Yu Ching's bucket chicken. That's what I want for sure. So a bunch of European companies. The Japan one is interesting. That's definitely something you wouldn't expect. And also Peru, right? Peru, Mexico, Portugal. Peru and Mexico, those colonial institutions that basically didn't change and just they still exist. And the Colombian mint, right? If I'm not... What is casa? Well... Casa means house. Oh, Casa de Moneda. Okay, that means That means money house, but it means mint. Okay. Wow, so Fiskars, yeah, famous Finnish company, Hudson's Bay Company in Canada. The Brazilian mint. So, you know what I'd like to see? I would like to see this map, but colored by the category of business that it is. Because it's a huge variety, right? In Japan, it's a mine. In most Latin American countries, it's the mint, the royal or the colonial mint. In the Czech Republic, it's the brewery. I wonder what it is in Ukraine. It's a salt plant, and Poland, it's a salt mine. You know, maybe I might make this map. I might just take this data and just recolor it, because I think that would almost be more interesting than looking at how old it is. I wanted to see what Russia was. Kazakhstan is pretty young. Where is Russia? Well, it has to be like 17 something, right? It can't be that. Huh, the Petrodvorets watch factory, okay. Huh. I don't know. Russia doesn't really have a history of business, I guess you could say. So it's kind of and I'm sure a lot of these countries, what this really is basically a map of business or business traditions or dare I say capitalism. But obviously I know it's not, that's not quite what it is. But different countries have different cultural norms, and that would certainly be reflected in this map. So is there anything else here to discuss? Let's see. And the most recent is Estonia, the Meridian, or what does that say? Kosovo? I mean, some of these countries haven't existed for very long, so no surprises there. China's oldest business sounds like KFC. Yes, sir. Sean's Bar. Scotland is gray on the map. Okay, that's so a bit of a mistake there from the map maker. Yeah, there you go. So I don't believe the oldest business in Kosovo is from 1999. I'm guessing they only define Kosovo business as those which came into being when Kosovo was a state. So limitation of the map. Although for Ukraine, they have a salt mine from like the 1500s, and Ukraine most certainly was not a state, well, at least continuously during that time period. So, okay, so I think that's gonna wrap it up, and that's a good week today. More political maps than usual. Again, maybe stirred up by this Kyle Rittenhouse stuff going around. So more political maps, but pretty good week overall, I think. One thing that I'm considering, I'm starting to see a lot of map accounts and maps popping up on Instagram. So I think I might do an episode dedicated just to Instagram maps, or maybe just to Twitter maps. I don't know how I'm going to get the top maps. That's going to be kind of hard to do, because with Reddit, it's really simple. You just search the top posts and everything is sorted for you. But on Twitter or Instagram, it's a little bit different. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that, but that's something that's on my radar. So stay tuned for next week.